Okay, so welcome to week 13 of 7134 EDN, Making Sense of Learning and New Technologies. Our last week of the online sessions. And of course, you're now no doubt focusing on your assessment tasks and getting those wrapped up. But this week, we still have an aspect of the course to look at, and that is around transformational learning. And the transformation of learning organisations, in particular through the use of technology. So we had a number of readings for this week, fairly short ones, because I know you're most likely focused on your assignment. But the transformational processes involved in changing organisations is an important step to come to grips with. So do we have any questions on the readings before we get into them? Okay, I'll take that as a no. And we'll start into one of the first readings. Okay, so look at transformational change reading. Okay, so this particular reading is a website, and it lists on the left-hand side a number of different aspects of transformational change in education. So the first one is around challenge, the degree to which increasing the level of difficulty is used in order to grow the capacity for learners and performing. So setting expectations and challenges to students and pushing them to achieve more than what they may feel initially that they're able to achieve. And there's various characteristics and pressures and examples related to each of these, and tips from moving along the spectrum from, in this case, enabling through to empowering. And I particularly like this website because it provides a range of examples. If you move your mouse over the examples, you get a little snapshot of how a teacher or a student is engaging with this process. But that's just one of the processes that you could include in your consideration for your implementation plan for your organization in terms of transforming the education that may be occurring there. There's also a whole range of others. Cognitive complexity has to do with the difficulty of the concepts that the students are engaging with. From simple concepts where it's mostly around learning of content and so forth, through Bloom's taxonomy to complex concepts around problem solving and project-based learning and all of those examples that students get engaged with. And then we have other ones around control, diversity, design, efficacy, feedback, measurement, ownership, pop it on that one, relationships, scope of learning, self-awareness, social orientation, and transparency. So in ownership, it's around who has the feeling of ownership of the learning process. Is it the teacher or is it the student? And we have, again, a spectrum from purely teacher-directed instruction through to guided instruction, where students have some agency over the decision-making processes, and the teacher has some agency over those processes, through to where the students have the majority of the agency and they seek assistance from teachers when they feel it's necessary or not necessary. And of course, these approaches do require a development. You can't just expect Year 4 students to go straight to self-directed learning. They tend to need to go through a process of initially directed learning, then guided, and then moving towards self-directed learning. But it can be done at any age level, but it does need some scaffolding to get to that stage, as we find for most of these transformation examples. And finally, we have an overview of the various approaches and the transformational aspects, and from the left-hand side of the scale through to the right-hand side of a scale to what we would call a transformational-based educational model. So let me just get back to you. Do we have any comments about any of those aspects of transformational learning? And welcome, Stephanie. I see you've joined us. Does anyone have any examples of where they've seen any of those elements of transformation in an educational organisation or in a setting where you've been either a student or a staff member or at university?
May I say something?
You may, Hutan.
I think it was similar. The radical parts, the red and green parts, were similar to traditional and progressive approach, and it was different aspects of mixture of these approaches. For me, it was like that.
Now, absolutely. The traditional through to progressive educational models also sit along a spectrum. The transformational approach probably does include more elements of the progressive approach to education, but progressive versus traditional education models have been around for a long time. The transformational model probably has introduced a number of new aspects that you could consider, particularly taking into account technological changes over the more pedagogical aspects of traditional versus progressive education as pedagogical models. You'll find elements in the aspects of transformation that relate to the design of the learning space, the relationships formed. Well, no, you are correct. Most of it is probably related in many respects to the progressive education model. Of course, they did take on many of these aspects. So it's a very good point.
Yeah, the feeding directly like a traditional approach and creating the situation that learners create and discover by themselves.
Yes, and so many people would probably argue that a lot of the aspects of transformational change and have got their strong grounding in the progressive educational movements of the 60s and 70s. But in the main, I don't think many of the proponents of such changes now would make that linkage back. You're quite correct that there probably is those strong linkages, but I don't think the agenda for transformation is as strong around pedagogy as it is around other elements of the learning environment and our relationship with students and student agency and so forth. But you could probably do quite a good mapping back to progressive education.
Thank you.
Nav, did you have something you'd like to contribute there?
Yeah, I can say that for the student, means students always need some guidance or direction to means we can't say all the education process to be self-directed.
No, absolutely. And we've certainly learned that purely self-directed learning has failed in terms of discovery learning as an approach. It's just too difficult to implement, and it doesn't produce sufficient return on investment of the time and energies put into that approach. It can work, but it's just not as effective as other educational approaches.
Yeah.
No problems. Now, so Stephanie, did you have anything you wanted to mention in regards to the transformational aspects as we've discussed there? Okay, so I'm guessing not in that case. And who else have we got? I'm just trying to remember. Patricia, that's right. Patricia, we've been discussing the transformational model that was provided on the website as a reading. And it looks at a series of spectrums from more historical approaches to educational practice, through to emerging practices, through to future directions and where things may be going if those transformational models are enacted. Have you had a chance to look at those readings?
Yeah, I did actually. I don't think that there was anything in there that I haven't read before. Yep. Obviously, the analytics and the personalised anytime, anywhere learning is where it's all headed. I found the MIT stuff very interesting, the open course work, and all that. But, you know, as always, it's going to be years and money.
Of course, the transformational processes are challenging, but there are schools and principals and even some systems that are looking at these models. The main advantage of the transformational resources, as I provided you there, is the little snippet examples from teacher and student practice. If you move the mouse over the various examples, most of the other resources haven't provided that level of case study aspects. So that's why I sort of provided you with that particular reading.
It was very interesting. I did read a few of them, but I guess in special ed we're always looking at you know, how to use technology, because there's never enough human resources, and I guess that's what drives our practice, is that how can we individualise and make the support more reliable, I guess, because, you know, teacher aides, we're getting called, they get called away, we get called into meetings. It's all that unreliability stuff that actually makes the technology a better bet.
That's a good point. And certainly, having been involved in education for quite a long time, I always recognise that in special education, a lot of the advances in pedagogy and teaching practice do tend to occur before they hit the mainstream, at least in terms of widespread adoption in the mainstream. Because of your specific needs and the need for individualised learning and those aspects, which we're only just beginning to try to accomplish in mainstream classrooms, but because of the additional needs that you have in your particular environment, there's been more effort put into trying to achieve that at an earlier stage than in many other sectors of education. And you do tend to get access to technology more quickly than many other schools and teachers, which is also a good opportunity for innovation and practice. Okay, let's have a look then at another reading, which is the Microsoft one, their particular model for transformation of education. This one's a little bit more complex and a bit more wordy, although not as wordy as some of your previous readings. So in this one, it again identifies the main elements that are needed for transformation around good strategic planning, organisational capacity and sustainability, quality assurance, partnerships, and teacher capacity and leadership capacity as being very important aspects. And then on the pedagogical side, you've got a focus still on the curriculum and the content and assessment, but inclusion and accessibility, making sure that all students have got access to learning in the pedagogical model that's being presented. The move towards personalised learning, the move towards learning communities, where we're no longer just relying upon a single teacher providing all the learning and directing the learning that students engage with, but that their students get to form part of a community, be that as part of the school or as part of a wider community of learners. And the transformation of learning environments, the shift towards different spaces that students can learn in, but also towards online learning and virtual excursions and all those other elements that are changing the way we think about where learning can occur. And the Microsoft papers are built upon a whole series of research reports and so forth. And this is really a summary of those. So the first conversation is around the vision for anywhere, anytime learning and learning for all. So the idea of mobile learning and all the elements that are related to ensuring that students can learn wherever they are and in whatever circumstances they may find themselves. I do a fair bit of work with the Brisbane School of Distance Education and their processes of providing good, high-quality learning, regardless of where students may be, across the state and indeed, in some cases, anywhere around the world, and allowing students to continue the learning process regardless of their circumstances. Then we have the second conversation, which is looking at the capacity of an organisation, and this is something you need to examine closely for your assignment. What can it achieve? And if we don't have that capacity, how can we build that capacity as part of our planning processes towards trying to achieve the outcomes we want to achieve? It's no good just saying, oh, we don't have staff or leadership that can do things like that. How can we actually change the staff and leadership to enable those things to occur? That's a more positive approach towards making transformational change. Then we've got elements around monitoring and evaluating processes to inform our practice. So we're not just making guesses about such things. How can we actually see that the things we're saying we want to see occur are actually occurring? And how can we verify that through different ways of measuring those processes? As I said before, ensuring equitable access and accessibility for all students so that we don't have siloing and differentiation of opportunities. Then we've got ensuring that the curriculum and the content and assessment is, well, in their approach, is related to real-world activities. So students can see relevance to their learning and to their assessment of that learning. So it's not just abstracted into problem sets that are just involved with them learning conceptual concepts, but they can see that the learning relates to things that they will be engaged with in their future, and that they're assessed on elements that relate to what they'll need to do in the future, not just on what teachers think they should learn for the sake of learning or because it's in the curriculum and so forth. The move towards personalised learning and for students to become global citizens where they can access learning from around the world in terms of globalisation. So it's not just learning things from your classroom, but they may be doing online courses from anywhere in the world. They may be learning from YouTube. They may be learning from their peers, from excursions or holiday trips that their parents take them on. A whole range of different learning opportunities that students have opportunities for that in the past we haven't necessarily recognised. A few more. Having a learning community. This is something that for adults has become an essential part of many teachers and other adult ongoing learning. Having a community of peers that we hear about things from and share resources between and have discussions about concepts with, and how we can model that process and support students to develop their own communities of learning. And the diversity of that and making sure we don't create a echo chamber where we only hear things related to what a similar people or similar thought processes with our peers, but we have diversity in our learning communities so that we hear about different ideas. That becomes particularly important when we look at social issues and say around history and geography and those aspects, where it's very easy for groupthink mentality to develop very quickly. And we can see some of the major problems that has occurred in international politics and conflict. And then there's building the leader and educator for transformation. How can we actually support teachers and leaders and school principals and so forth be agents for transformational change? So it's not all just about the students. We also have to support staff because they're the ones that are going to model these processes for our students. Okay, so that's a whole range of different elements and some approaches around creating champions for these different aspects in organizations, having good, strong communication processes, creating exemplars and examples of how these things can occur, and celebrating these successes as they're achieved. And there's a few different diagrams there to support that model. And then we've got the final one around designing technology for efficient and effective schools. At the moment, we tend to take whatever technologies are available, but we should actually be driving the process and saying, this is the technology we need, and getting people to create it for education. So if we need technology to support group work and project work and all these other aspects, not just relying upon what is developed for industry, but specifying what we need to have available so that the visions that we want to see in schools are enacted. Okay, so there's a whole lot of things there, a little bit more around ownership and private and public communities and so forth, and you can read through those in more detail. But let's hear your thoughts. So Patricia mentions that your son is doing a subject with Business School of Distance Education and having some technical glitches and so forth. Okay. Yes, those things can occur. But they are pushing the boundaries and trying to offer educational opportunities to schools and to students that wouldn't necessarily have those opportunities.
Absolutely, Jason. And it's allowed him to do a subject that he would not have had access to otherwise. So it's been really good, and it was something he was very interested in, philosophy and reason, and it came about because he transferred from another school and was unable to carry over one of his OP subjects. So,
yes.
Yeah, it was good. He's enjoyed it, but every now and then the technical glitches just get to him.
Yes, well, whenever that's an important aspect, though, of educational technology. You do tend to be at the cutting edge, and when you're at the cutting edge, mistakes are made and things go wrong.
Yeah, but it's good because then they have to learn strategies anyway. Okay, this is happening. How do I deal with it? So it's always a learning context, you know?
Absolutely, and that's the positive of engagement with technology. Of course, it would be fantastic if everything just worked, but whenever you're trying new things and you're going beyond the comfort zone of well-established processes and practices, there will be glitches and problems. But that's something we can model for students as well. Of course, a lot of student learning is outside of their comfort zone and outside of things that they know will work. And for them to become comfortable and familiar with failure and how to overcome those processes of failure and see it as a learning opportunity and recognize it and acknowledge it as a teacher, that it's not a negative, it's a process where any creative and innovative aspect is going to involve some failures. And in fact, it should. If you're not having some failure, you're not pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone into your zone of proximal development where your learning really will be occurring.
Yeah, I think it's a shame. I don't think BSDE is used as much as it could be by the schools. It's a fantastic resource, but I find the schools are unwilling to share that enrolment. They don't like doing that because it has an impact on their own staff. But for kids in the SEP, like I have a student who's in chemistry, it would be great if he could then follow that up with some BSD, you know, because you can replay the lectures and whatever, you can replay stuff. That's what he needs. But his teacher, his chemistry teacher, doesn't want to do podcasts or anything like that. She has no mechanism for capturing, you know, that. So that's a bit of a disadvantage.
It is we are in a transformational process in that respect at the moment. And the funding models around those courses have changed. It used to be centrally funded, and that was schools didn't mind that. Now the funding is related directly to school budgets, and so it is a decision whether or not to utilise teachers at distance education organisations or utilise teachers in your own school, which means you'll have fewer teachers in your own school if you're investing in outsourcing those aspects. But it is also a good modelling process because that's where much of education is moving to. And much of students' ongoing learning beyond school and into university and into the workforce will be around that, picking and choosing from a whole range of learning opportunities rather than just relying upon one organisation or one aspect. I might have mentioned it to you in the course earlier in our subject on online learning, but in Canada, students have to be allowed to study in other classrooms online. It's part of their legal framework. And in many states in the United States, it's a requirement for graduation that students do a certain number of online courses as part of their push towards this change. So there are movements happening, and Brisbane School of Distance Education and the other distance education schools are certainly leading in some of those aspects. And I know that St Hilda's is doing a little bit of stuff around online education, particularly for very young students. But I won't put Beth on the spot and get her to explain that just at the moment. So we've been looking at the documents on the readings for this week, and we've had a look at the transformational learning or transformational document, and we've looked at the Microsoft document, looking at their transformational model. And we have one more document to have a look at, and we'll just go to that now. And this is one from MIT, where it details the various strategies and approaches that MIT is using to explore transformation in education. So a few of the big ones that they've been involved with is an open sharing, what we call open courseware, where they made the decision to share all of their courses freely available to anyone to have a look at and utilize. And that was a big move for them, and a lot of educational organisations were quite aghast at the idea of their intellectual property being shared out in that way. But it's been a great benefit to MIT because it's highlighted them as leaders, and it's also highlighted the quality of education at their organisation. And it's also been a huge benefit to particularly third world educational organisations, in particular universities in the third world, where the staff there, which may not have the same level of experience and expertise as some MIT staff members, could take their learning packages and use them to support their teaching in their own universities and education organisations. And indeed, quite a lot of secondary school teachers have also utilised those resources to supplement their own teaching processes. So it was a big, ambitious move from MIT, and people were wondering where it would go, but they have set the standard, and increasingly, education organisations are sharing their resources freely and allowing people to utilise those in different ways. So you can read a little bit more about that, but the next one is around digital archives. There's a big concern at the moment that we're producing all this wonderful stuff, but how we're actually keeping track of it and stopping it from all disappearing, as many of you have probably got things on floppy disks, probably lots of resources and videos and pictures on CDs. It's quite difficult now to find a CD player. We've still got DVD players, but they're also on the way out. So our whole process of archiving material and keeping it is problematic. Yes, we can store it on the cloud on someone else's computer, but then we're reliant upon them staying around forever. And we know that that doesn't happen. A huge number of people are sharing all of their photographic libraries, for example, on Instagram and on Google and on Facebook. But over time, these companies will change. Google may decide that there's no real profit in providing a hosting service for everyone's videos and photos. And they could decide to close that down. So there is dangers in those processes. But there's also dangers in trying to maintain our own digital archives. So more and more we're looking at governments to re-step back into this place, primarily through our library systems. And the National Library Archives of Australia and so forth are trying to get funding and processes to actually keep digital archives of all of our resources. But the problem is we're just generating too much data. I think the latest statistics I've seen is that in the last 2 years, we've created more data than in all of human history. And we just can't archive and store the amount of data that's being generated. So we do need to be more selective in that data, because a lot of it is simply automated data collections and scientific data that hasn't been really interpreted. But our really valuable stuff that's going to be important for historical reference around photographic libraries and all of those elements is something that we're really concerned about in terms of keeping. The iLabs project is around remote access laboratories. So where students can do chemistry experiments or robotic experiments remotely from, there's a lot of work happening around that. It's been happening for a long time. We had a big project linking with educational observatories in the United Kingdom and in Australia. And so students in Australia could remotely use telescopes in England, where it would be nighttime. And students in England would remotely use telescopes in Australia, where for them it would be nighttime, when they were in class, and conduct their astronomy experiments and so forth. That went on for about 10 years, but it has recently been closed down. But that's the idea behind the remote laboratories. There's a range of other initiatives that they've been looking at around assessment and how learning spaces can be designed. Very popular one for school principals at the moment, redesigning their schools to have open spaces and open plan learning and staff areas and so forth. So lots of different projects that they've been exploring, particularly around sharing, collaboration, active learning, and learning spaces. And you can look into those in more detail. But in the short amount of time we have left, let's hear your thoughts. Anything from any of those MIT innovations that you might be considering including in your own implementation strategies? Okay, so I see a few comments. Good to see you know an MIT graduate. Okay. Well, that's really the content side of things for tonight that we wanted to focus on. Of course, I suspect we might have a few questions on your assessment task. Or am I incorrect in that? Is that Nav? No. Okay, so everyone's going really well with their final assessment. That's wonderful to hear. So I'm looking forward to seeing some wonderful implementation plans that you've developed. Let's just have a look at a few elements. In particular, I want to make sure that you're taking note of the assessment rubric. Of course, while I provided a fair bit of detail breaking down approaches you can do to construct your implementation plan, this is the final say in terms of where I'll be looking for your assessment. So it's important that you are firstly aware of it. Now, Beth is checking that extra tasks are simply a completion. Oh, okay, the completion aspects. Yeah, Beth, I'll talk about those in a second. Essentially, you're correct, but I'll just go through this rubric and a few other little things first, and then we'll discuss those extra tasks. Generally, there's no problems in people achieving those. It's, but we'll talk about that in a sec. Okay, so in the rubric, the first 25% is basically on your ideas, your vision statement, and that there's a clear, that your vision statement is related to the the system, the learning environment, or the the organisation that you've based it on. So that's where you describe your innovations and so forth. But it's only 25%. The other aspects is you do need to explain who this change is going to impact and who are the people that are concerned and going to be interested in such a change. And they're the stakeholders. And you do need to identify those and show that you've considered a whole range of different people that are going to be involved in the changes that you're proposing. Then there's 25% around how you're going to get those people on board with your changes. How are you going to influence them to have them support and adopt the changes that you're proposing? And then finally, how are you going to evaluate these changes to ensure that what you're suggesting occurs? And this is really a whole series of thought bubbles that you'll find. Let me share it. In the list of elements to do with your, where is it? To do with your task. Okay, so some of you sort of maybe sort of thinking about that sort of point 9, where then there's management plan. Many of those elements relate to that final criteria. Have you considered the various other aspects related to your evaluation and how you're going to make sure that the changes that you're attempting to achieve continue and progress into a long-term transformational change for your organization? So have you considered the capacity for your organization to manage the change process? How are you going to make sure that it's a sustained change? What resources would be needed to have that be a sustained change? What funding strategies have you thought about? We can't just sort of say we're going to do all these wonderful things if they're truly impractical around funding. But it's not to say you should limit yourself. You just need to consider various funding opportunities. And it may be going for grants, government grants, entrepreneurial grants, like the Gates Foundation or various other groups that can support such initiatives. Parent and P&C organizations, you may say that we're going to run a huge Lamington drive and raise huge amounts of money that are going to support all the changes you need. I'm not worried about whether or not they're so practical, but I am worried about whether or not you've considered how to sustain the changes that you're suggesting, where they're going to involve additional funding. And how you're going to evaluate those changes so that there's a process that you've built in to measure the change. And finally, that you've got a review strategy. No big implementation plan will ever work out perfectly. There'll always be some aspects that become problematic, but there'll also be other aspects that become opportunities. And how you've built in a process to review that and make adjustments without the need to have wholesale scrapping of the plan and coming up with a totally new plan. So there's some elements to think about and consider. Any questions on those before we then pop back and discuss the completion activities?
I have one confusion.
Yes.
What's the exact meaning of like the levers for change?
Could you repeat that, please?
What's the meaning of the levers for change?
Okay. Levers for change are, okay, say you've got a principle that is focused on certain things. So maybe they're focused on achieving good test results. So if you've identified that that's the main thing that they're interested in, then as part of your strategy for your implementation plan, you would highlight that these things will achieve better test results for the students. So the lever for change for that particular person, that particular, what do we call them? Not entities, what do I call them in this process? Stakeholders. So for that stakeholder, being the principal or the school administration, they're interested in certain things. How are you going to meet their interests so that they then support what you're suggesting? Parents might be interested in other things. Parents might be just interested in the students being happy and enjoying the school experience. So then you would, if that's the thing that they're really interested in, then as part of your implementation plan, you should be thinking about how that would meet their needs. And other groups and other stakeholders will have different interests. You might have a group of teachers that are really focused on the teaching of science, and they're not really concerned about anything else. They really just want to make sure that science is being taught really, really well in a really highly rigorous way. So if they're going to be a problem in terms of your implementation, then you need to think about, okay, how can your implementation plan support their needs? Does that make sense for you? So it's really the stakeholders and identifying what they want to see as an outcome from the implementation plan and how you can build in things that will support their interest and needs. Sometimes it might be necessary, if you can't provide them with positive support, then you have to provide them with negative support. So it may be there's a group of teachers that just will not get behind, and you know that, and there's no way you can think of to do that. And it may be you need to work out ways of getting rid of those teachers and having them leave the system. That should hopefully be a last resort. Of course, most people will have some things that they can be influenced by, some things that they want to see achieved, and as much as possible, you try to accommodate that in your implementation plan, and that makes it much easier then to have that implementation plan be successful.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the implementation plan assignment? Okay, so let's look then at the other aspect of your assessment, which is the completion activities. You can do and receive some marks for 20% of the course simply through doing things. So they're not assessed on a criteria based, they're simply assessed on a completion aspect. And I'm allowed to have 20% of your assessment related to this. So I include this to give you some recognition for the effort that you've put into doing things, such as coming along to the online Hangouts or doing the quizzes, and a few other things that are built into there. So what you can do is, if you can work out that you've done so many quizzes, I think each quiz is worth 0.5%, add up the number of quizzes you've done, divide that by 2, and you've got a certain percentage. Add up the number of online Hangouts you've attended. Each of those is also worth 0.5%. Divide that by 2. And I think fairly quickly you should be able to have achieved 20%. If you haven't, then there's a few other additional things in there, such as doing the introductory posting of your bio, doing your class systems analysis model. Many of you would have done that in week 1 or week 2. That's worth 1% for doing that. If you need others, some of the bottom ones. Okay, if you've done the pre-readings, not that I've been tracking, but if you've done the readings, you can get 0.5% for doing a reading each week, having done all the readings for that week. I rely upon honesty in this process. It's almost impossible not to get 20% for some basic contribution. But if you're having troubles making a 20%, let me know. You can get less than 20%. But in the main, students normally have no troubles justifying 20%. Any questions on that completion activity?
Sorry, I didn't understand completely. if I completed the the what are the activities
Yes.
from the content website, then in this page I have to mark a tick
Yes, just tick
all
those.
the and
So-
in the last ones also.
Oh, I see, because I've only got one tick for those last two. That's a good point. I'm just wondering if there's a comment box that is included when you, yes, if you, okay, just tick the bottom ones and I'll calculate out how much you would have got for those. So if the last ones, which might have more than 0.5 up to 6.5, if you tick them, I'll go through and look at my records, or if you're still having troubles meeting that 20%, I'll take that into consideration if you've ticked those bottom two.
And I didn't receive the percentages for some of the quizzes. I just received like message, you have completed this.
Well, that's generally, yes, if you received an email saying you've completed it, that's sort of evidence that I received those emails as well. So I've got all those, knowing if you've completed the quizzes or not.
Okay, thank you.
But go through and tick them. I'd be very surprised, given that you've been to the Hangouts and you've done the quizzes, that you'll have difficulties in getting that 20%. You can't get more than 20%. So once you've ticked enough for 20%, you can sort of stop ticking. Okay, Beth has received all the notifications to say that I've done the quizzes and ticked everything off. Done readings, made notes as samples as the ticks. Done readings, made notes, as simple as the ticks, and done after that. Correct. If I was concerned and I thought that you weren't, hadn't been engaged in the course, then I might consider things and get you to provide evidence and so forth. But for pretty much everyone that has been actively involved, there's no real problems with that. Yeah, so yeah, almost everyone gets the 20% for the completion activities. So you can really consider that the rest of the course is out of 80%, and assessment has worked out in that respect. But it does, the reason we use it is for those that don't do anything and then come along and just do the assessment and try to scrape through just with that. And it's a process we can use to help alleviate that difficulty if it sometimes occurs. Okay, well, we're a little bit ahead of time. Do we have any other questions on assessment, or indeed any other aspects of the entire course? Given this is our final week and your last chance to ask questions or clarifying elements, I hope you've enjoyed the course. I always enjoy seeing you progress through. You generally start off very hesitant and uncertain about this whole area of technology, and by the end, coming up with implementation plans for an entire organization is quite a step up, particularly for many students that are involved in the course who initially don't really understand many of the technologies and are just trying to get their grips on learning about some new technologies. So I always like to congratulate you on progressing through the course and engaging with it. I know there's quite a lot of concepts in here, and we do cover things at quite a high level, but that's the nature of a master's course. You don't want to go away just having learnt what you already knew. That said, there's a lot more to learn about transformational processes in education and around educational technology. We have looked at a huge number of them in this course, but there's always more. There's always new technologies emerging. There's always new ways of engaging with technology and ways of transforming the educational processes. And thanks, Beth, allowing you to hone your skills in implementing innovative change. Yes, and that's certainly what I hope to see as my own personal outcome from the course, is you guys going off and actually making a significant change in whatever organization or country or sector or system that you get involved in. Because there's a significant need in education for change, and we do have a lack of leadership around this area, because most educational leaders don't necessarily get involved in transformational change to this degree. They're much more involved in more administrative and managerial aspects of their careers. And it really does need some leaders such as yourselves to provide support to those managerial-based leaders to allow real transformational change to occur in an organization. Particularly where we want to move to distributed leadership, where it's not just one person making all the decisions. Because in the complexity of today's educational environments, it's really a very difficult process to attempt nowadays. And drawing upon the expertise of a whole team, and hopefully you've developed some expertise around educational technologies and transformational change in that respect, that you can feed into the organizational changes that are needed. But we do need to remember that educational technologies and the changes we've been discussing are just one element of change that's possible in educational organizations. So we shouldn't go away thinking that it's all about technological change. That's totally incorrect. There's a whole lot of other aspects that are also required in education to create the best possible learning outcomes for our students. But this course couldn't cover everything. We did have to focus on one aspect, and that was on technology. Okay, we're getting a new principal. Oh, congratulations. And supportive of educational technology, and maybe they'll make an expanded budget for it. Hopefully so. But that is one of the managerial conundrums of leaders, is managing limited resources. And hopefully you've seen a few examples in this course where maybe you can go off and use the proposals that you've developed, your implementation plans, to ask for funding through other avenues, through grants and other initiatives. Education Queensland does have a lot of grants and initiative support for innovative change, but you have to find out about them and apply for them in order to get access to those. And absolutely, showing them the importance and what change is possible as a result of these innovations, and many people are likely to be supportive. And yes, it could be a great Christmas project. Okay then. Well, with that, we'll start our final goodbyes to everyone. So thank you very much for your participation in the online aspect of the course. Certainly there are others that may be just following this course, I know, through the videos, where they've decided not to participate live, and that's perfectly okay. You're certainly welcome to do so in that way and engage with the course in that process. But I certainly enjoy having people to talk to and to discuss these issues with, and it expands my own learning. So thank you very much for participating in the video conferences and the chats that we've had, and expanding my own perspectives, particularly around some of the countries that you've come from and the challenges that you've got in those organizations. Oh, and you've completed your master's. Well done, Beth. And extra congratulations to you with this process, assuming you pass, of course. Okay. Well, we'll wrap it up then. Don't forget, there should be some course evaluations that you receive in emails or through the systems. And we certainly appreciate your feedback and your commentary in those. And other than that, please stay in touch. If you're doing great things, I always love to hear about them. And if you need advice and some suggestions when you've got your own implementation plans that you're doing in the future, or some new technology, contact me by email, and I'm more than happy to help you out and give some assistance where I can. Okay then. Well, we're just coming up. Well, we've still got a couple more minutes, but I've run out of goodbyes. So thanks everyone, and good luck with the rest of your studies, and for Beth, for your future PhD studies.
Thank you, Jason, but I don't think a PhD is on the horizon.
Maybe not yet.
Not yet. Thank you so much.
Okay then. Bye-bye all.
Bye, Lum.
Bye.
Bye-bye.